Okay.
All right, do we have any new people? I'm looking through the names here.
Anybody who's new, maybe you can unmute and just say hello. Tell us how you found out about the classes.
Oh, I'm new.
Hello.
Gayla.
Ayla.
Yeah, so we had a little conversation together and it's good to see you.
Yes, good to see you too. I tried to call Scott's office today, but I just got a recording that said they'd call me back later. You are the one who is a dietitian, right?
I'm a physician assistant, work internal medicine.
Well, who's the dietitian?
Well,
we don't have a dietitian at Oregon Medical Group, but we have a Eugene plant-based providers. We have Sean Egglestone, who's part of our group. I don't know. Yeah, my team is taking new patients if you're trying to get into a new primary care, but otherwise it's just the classes here in Eugene.
Gayla, Scott and I do these classes together, and that's why I gave you his name. And I think maybe you thought he was a registered dietitian, but he's.
Well, there's one online that I guess I got confused. Probably he may not be plant-based at all.
Well, Thomas Bosch is, I don't know if you saw this.
That might have been him.
From the Physician Committee for Responsible Medicine.
Yes, and he's in Eugene, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think
he's also part of our Eugene plant-based providers. So he follows a plant-based diet himself, but he counsels as a dietitian any eating style and just tries to make good recommendations for his clients.
Okay.
But we highly recommend him and because he works independently, and then the other two dietitians we have with Eugene plant-based providers, they work at McKinsey-Willamette Hospital, so they're in the hospital system.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Anybody else have questions? New want to introduce themselves, or any quick other questions, comments before I get started? I got a lot to cover tonight, so we can get started anytime.
I have a quick one.
Sure, go ahead.
Does anybody know of a good chiropractor around Eugene Springfield?
I don't personally.
Okay. Oh, all right. Thanks.
Yeah, I had a question regarding Dr. Esselson's book is published, was 2007 or something, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Do you know if he has come out with any significant retractions or additions?
No, I mean, not really. There is a lot of new science since then, but he still has pretty much the same recommendations. I think Charlie can chime in. I think, he's backed off a little bit on nuts a little bit maybe, and so maybe have a little bit, but he's coming from the perspective of, the really severe heart disease, people that can't have any more stents, no more bypasses, they're kind of in the end of the road. So he's really, really strict, but he does, I've heard him talk about, the newer science that's come out. Well, probably a little bit of nuts is probably okay, and a few other things here and there, but still, I would say 98% of it's the same is what his recommendations are.
Yeah, this is the book that you're talking about, Prevent
Yes, sir.
Reverse Heart Disease. And from whatever I've heard, he basically keeps focusing on eat whole plant foods, eat greens throughout the day, sometimes up to 6 times a day, particularly if you have underlying heart disease. And I agree with Scott. I think he has, come down a little bit. That nuts may be okay for some, but if you have one foot on the banana peel and one foot in the grave, you're having chest pain. Probably best to stick with his strict no avocados, nuts, seeds, or olives. Anything with.
What about if your abdominal aortic aneurysm in the previous 2 years went from 3.4 to 3.7 centimeters?
I think that's,
And 79.
yeah. So your blood pressure, is that okay?
Yes.
So
Although
if you've
I do some strenuous exercises.
I don't think that's a problem. And I guess if it got to 4.5, I'd be kind of maybe more biting my nails about it. But how many years did it take to go 0.3?
Uh, 2 years. There's 2 years between those two tests.
Some of that may be technician. There may be some change in how the technicians measure. So I would probably get it repeated again every 6 months to 8 months or a year. And then see it, it may stabilize at some point in time as long as you're keeping your blood pressure well controlled. You're following with someone, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And as far as diet to control that, greens handful 6 times a day is what Esselstyn would say. That tries to keep your arteries as clean as possible.
Yeah. I have a problem with it. 10 grams of fat is challenging for me to maintain my weight. Yeah. Because I have, celiac disease, although my numbers have really come down since it's diagnosed. So I think my weight has gone up. It went from 152 to 128, and it's up to 146 now. So it's really
well, you're doing okay then.
Yeah.
Whatever you're doing right now, sounds like it's doing okay.
Yeah. My transglutamase antibody thing is plummeted from greater than 100 down to 11.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay.
So I would just kind of keep doing what you're doing, and since you've regained your weight, and just follow the ultrasound, and keep your fingers crossed. Keep living life, finding joy every day.
Thank you. I'm
Okay.
trying.
Okay, we all are. We can be trying at times also. Any other questions? So when you check your blood pressure, does one arm read different than the other? Sometimes, we have variation in blood pressure. So, if you're eating healthy and your arteries are healthy, you're probably not going to have much problem with your blood pressure. In the past, I've been confused as to whether to take the one that's the highest or the one that's the lowest. I'm not sure what the current recommendation is. Maybe you could take the average, but if you're really eating healthy, you'll probably be able to get your blood pressure in a reasonable range. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Scott's got a important amount of information to deal with today, so carry on, and maybe we'll have some more time for questions as time goes on.
Yeah. All right. We'll get started here. Let me share my screen. See that okay? And you guys can hear me okay?
I can see you and hear you.
All right.
See the screen and hear you.
All right. Well, let's get started. So this is my talk on nutritional myths and other popular diets. And next week, Charlie will be doing his talk on the diet wars. So kind of a continuation of the popular diet theme that I'll touch on a little bit towards the end of this talk today. So I'm hoping today you guys will come away with kind of a appreciation for maybe just some basics of nutrition that you'll understand better, and then understand the difference between when information comes in, because we're always getting bombarded with nutrition information, whether it's social media or on the news or in a magazine or wherever a friend, someone at the gym. There's all this information that comes at us all the time. And I think this talk will be really important to help you kind of keep in perspective what information is important and what information you kind of keep in context. So you kind of like, okay, that's good information, but how does that kind of fall into place as far as, is it just a detail, a bit of a trivial detail, or is it something that's going to be really impactful when it comes to nutrition and what you learned today about what's the most important aspects of nutrition? I think that's what I'm really hoping you guys will walk away with today, a good appreciation for that. And then that'll carry with you the rest of your life when you get new information coming in. Even the stuff that we talk about in class every week, and Dr. Greger and all this stuff, it's important to kind of, oh, that's really interesting when we talk about a show a video and talk about a specific bit of information, a mechanism of how something works and why this particular nutrient or this food is good or bad. And then you can kind of, oh, okay, so this is interesting, but kind of be able to keep everything in perspective and kind of have that knowledge and have that wisdom that you gain over time when you go through all this information. So an old error is always more popular than a new truth. So there'll probably be some new truths to some of you with some of this information. And so just know that that's a very, very true proverb that's out there. So what I'm going to talk about first, I'm going to give you two basic definitions. I'll talk about reductionism and holism, and I'm going to come back to these terms quite frequently throughout this talk. And because I really want to make sure you guys understand, I'm going to ask for some interaction with you guys too when I'll be asking you questions about reduction and holism as I first teach you about what they mean. So what reductionism is breaking things down into smaller parts. So when it comes to nutrition, you'll be thinking about single nutrients and single mechanisms. Well, this particular nutrient does this and has this effect on the body, or has this enzyme and it converts to this. And that's what reductionism is just the small parts. Kind of like with, if you think about an orchestra and there's a whole concerto going on, and all the individual instruments are the reductionism. That's all the instruments that come together and actually make the music itself. So think about the parts that make up the whole. That's what reductionism is. And some examples besides in nutrition is like pharmaceuticals. So pharmaceuticals use reductionist science to figure out, okay, this particular chemical converts to this, and this is how this affects this particular target in the body, and that's how pharmaceuticals work. And then same with any kind of technology. I mean, putting the man on the moon, or cell phones, or think of any kind of technology that we've had over the last couple hundred years. It's reductionist science that's led us to being able to form new technology. So it's a very, very important concept that we actually need to have to advance in science and everything else. So it's very reductionism in this talk will sometimes be considered, it might come across as being a negative thing, because we'll be talking about how we sometimes in nutrition, we get a little bit too focused on the reductionist science. And I'm not trying to do that when we talk about it. I'm just trying to kind of give you an understanding of what reductionism is and how it can be limited in what it can teach you about certain things, especially when it comes to nutrition. But it is still very vital and very important. So we can't have holism without reductionism. So you kind of have a little basic understanding of what reductionism is. It's the component parts, all the details. And then holism is then the big picture. And when it comes to nutrition, it's the whole food that's the holism. It's so because a food is thousands of nutrients, thousands of mechanisms that are playing at the same time. When we eat a piece of food, there's thousands of nutrients, there's thousands of mechanisms, all different things going on at the same time. And so the holism then is the actual whole concert, the whole concerto. That's all the little component parts, the instruments, and then the whole music that's coming out. That's the holism. It's another important phrase, don't miss the forest for the trees, right? So the forest is the holism, the trees are the reductionist, the pieces, right? So the trees make up the forest. It's a kind of basic understanding of reductionism and holism. Okay. So let's start talking about basic nutrition. So we have macronutrients and we have micronutrients. So we're going to talk about both. So I still have reductionism up there because macronutrients, which consist of protein, fat, and carbohydrates, those are the component parts in a food. And so protein, fat, and carbohydrates are the 3 macronutrients that contain calories. Technically, water is a macronutrient as well, but since it doesn't have calories, I don't have it listed here, but technically water is a macronutrient as well. So protein, fat, and carbohydrates, this is where we get our calories, and these are the macronutrients. So we're thinking about reductionism, right? So does that make sense? We have these 3 component parts of any food, and that's what makes up the calories. So does that make sense to you guys? That's the macronutrients are the reductionist, and then the food is the actual holistic. So we'll come back to that again, but the other component is micronutrients. So micronutrients are also parts of all foods, and they can, and what they are vitamins and minerals, phytonutrients, phytochemicals. So phyto means plant. So phyto, plant nutrients, phytochemicals, plant chemicals. These do not contain calories, but they're very, very important for good health. So we kind of all know this, right? Vitamins, minerals. You might not have been familiar with phytonutrients and phytochemicals. They're something that's being discovered all the time. And I know I actually read a whole textbook back 10 years ago when I was first getting started studying nutrition. I read a whole textbook that was all on the evidence-based science of phytonutrients and phytochemicals. I know it sounds really exciting, like an exciting textbook to you guys, but I read that entire book, and I remember like with a strawberry at that time, they had identified about 100 phytonutrients and phytochemicals in a single strawberry at that time, 10 years ago. And now I think they're well over 1,000 that they've identified. So nutritional science is continually discovering these different phytonutrients and phytochemicals, because kind of the idea behind the reductionism aspect of nutrition is that they were trying to figure out, okay, why? So strawberries seem to lower your risk of breast cancer, for example, and lots of other types of cancer. It's like, well, why is it? Well, they kind of the nutrition science mind is like, okay, well, it's got to be some of these phytonutrients and phytochemicals. So what they would be trying to do, what the scientists were doing, was trying to pick out some of these phytonutrients and phytochemicals, put them into a supplement form, and then do a randomized controlled trial on patients to figure out, well, maybe it's these phytonutrients that are reducing the risk for cancer, or maybe it's these ones. And every time what I took away from that textbook, reading all of those, was that it never really worked, because it isn't just the phytonutrients or the phytochemicals, it's the holistic, it's the whole food itself. It's the combination of all the different things. It's the vitamins, the minerals, the fat, the carbohydrates, the protein, all the thousands of phytochemicals and phytonutrients all working synergistically together. And the sum is greater, or the total is greater than sum of the parts. So it's the holistic nature of that strawberry that's magical, or that's so healthy, not the individual components that are important. So that's what I wanted you to take away from that when I talked about phytonutrients and phytochemicals, is kind of, again, comparing the reductionist science versus the holistic. So when you do a study on an interventional study on strawberries, it makes it a little more challenging, because there's so many other variables that could be contributing to why it's healthy. But the takeaway is just that, oh, well, I should just eat more strawberries, not worry about which of the phytochemicals or phytonutrients they're providing the health benefits. So holism is simply the food. So broccoli, for example, contains all 3 macronutrients, contains protein, contains fat, contains carbohydrates, and thousands of micronutrients. So it's simply the food. That's all you have to really remember, is it's not just the parts, it's the holistic, the whole thing that's healthy. So any questions before I move on, any questions about reductionism and holism and kind of the examples? And anybody have any questions about that? You can unmute if you need to.
I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but remember, you can unmute people.
All
Did
right.
that work?
Okay, go ahead.
Did that work? I guess it did.
Yeah, it did.
Eventually,
It's
Will
Rob,
you-
right?
yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, it's Rob.
Okay, Rob, go ahead. Good to have you.
Will the direction eventually be that a balanced approach is whole foods as well as supplements when necessary?
Now we talk about in different classes. We do talk about certain supplements and throughout classes, and like vitamin B12 and vitamin D3 and a little bit of iodine, and but for the most part, multivitamins aren't needed. But we can probably have some time at the end of class to, if you have any questions about particular nutrients, we can definitely. So it would be a great time to discuss that. So yeah, good question.
Okay. Well, you've hit all the kinds of foods that I love already so far. That's good.
Oh, good. All right, so I have a test question for you guys.
Uh-oh.
So first I'm going to define starch, and then you're going to tell me, and I'm going to ask you a question about it. So starch is the storage organ for a plant. It stores carbohydrates, which is energy, for the rest of the plant above. So examples being potatoes, beans, intact whole grains, which would be like brown rice and oats and quinoa, bulgur, amaranth, farro, all those ancient grains, nuts and seeds. So those are examples of starches. You can put in, squash, corn would also be considered starches. So they're the storage organs of plants. So my question to you guys is, are starches, is a starch an example of a reductionist view, or is it a holistic view? So
It's a reduction.
starch. So yeah, would starch be reductionist or holistic?
I vote reductionist.
Actually be holistic, because starch is a food. So the examples of starches are potatoes, beans, intact whole grains, nuts and seeds. So are potatoes, beans, intact whole grains, nuts and seeds, are those foods or are those nutrients?
Foods.
Good, good. So I'm glad I asked that question, because that's what, I'm sure there's other people who had the same thought, because, starch is a food, so we'll be talking about carbs, fat, and protein here in just a second. So anytime it's a food, we're talking about holism versus reductionism. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great. All right, so carbohydrates. So is a carbohydrate reductionist or holistic? Anyone? Carbohydrate reductionist or holistic?
Reductionist.
Correct. Carbohydrate would be reductionist, exactly, because it's a macronutrient, right? A carbohydrate is not a food. But what is it? All of you probably think, I know before I studied nutrition, when someone says carbs, would you say that's a positive word or a negative word? Just in your basic opinion, based on what you've learned, maybe until these classes.
Negative.
Negative, right? Yeah, me too. I was in the same boat. And so carbs, I thought I was a negative thing. I should avoid carbohydrates, but no food is a carb. Potato is not a carb, it's a whole food. Yeah, there's quite a few of the calories in a potato are from carbohydrate, and we're going to talk about that going forward, but a potato is not a carbohydrate. A potato is a food. A potato actually contains carbohydrates, but it also contains protein, it also contains fat, it also contains vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and phytochemicals and fiber and water, and it's a whole matrix, it's a whole package. And so what I'm hoping you guys will be picking up on in this class is it's the package that's important, not the individual nutrients that the food contains that's important. So a carbohydrate. And so, yeah, good or bad is a relative term. It's kind of vague. So when we're trying to figure out what is a good carb and what is a bad carb, it's the correct question to ask is it processed or refined, or is it unprocessed, unrefined? So those are the actual terms that we want to be thinking about when we decide if we do hear about a carb, even though you're going to be thinking, okay, well, carbohydrates are part of foods. I want to pick the best food package that I can. But still, when we're just talking about this reductionist carbohydrate, we kind of need to tease out a few things and think about a few more things when we think about carbohydrates. So I have a video I'm going to show you from Jeff Novick, who is a dietitian. And I have this full lecture on the class website under videos. And I showed a bit of the same lecture in the calorie density class several weeks back. And but this is a section that he just talks about carbohydrates. So I want you guys to watch this, and then I'll see if you have any questions about carbohydrates after we watch this video.
So I mentioned this yesterday. Let's just briefly touch on carbohydrates because, people are so confused. You could come here 2-3 times, listen to these talks, you walk out and you go, yeah, but should I really eat carbs? Right? Right. Well, why should you eat them? I mentioned it last night. High carbohydrate foods, if they're the right carbs, are the richest sources of vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, microminerals, trace minerals, and energy. They're the best fuel for your body. This is why you want to eat them. Now, if you cut out foods that are high in carbs, you can lose weight because you'll cut out calories, but you're also going to mortgage your long-term health for short-term weight loss because you're going to cut out the most nutrient-rich food. So you don't want to do it. Now, the problem is nobody really knows how to tell a good carb from a bad carb. We know there's a difference. There's good fats and bad fats. There's good carbs and bad carbs. And you hear things like glycemic index, right? And you hear things like complex and simple, right? Have you all heard that? To me, those are all way too complex. I've made it simpler. If you want to know the difference between the carbs you should eat and the carbs you might want to avoid, is this test. The carbs you should eat are unrefined, and the ones you should avoid are the refined. And unrefined carbs are very simple. You could eat them the way they grow in the garden. Make sense? So this potato, grow in the garden? Can you eat it this way except for the fact you might cook it or peel it? So it's good for you? Okay, but what if I cut it up into sticks, put in the deep fryer for a little bit? No, what did I change about it? I refined or processed it in some way, and the more I do it, the worse it gets. So this is really the simplest way. Can I eat it the way it grew in the garden, except for the fact that I might want to cook it or peel it? Very simple. You don't have to be a biochemist to get this. So, the problem was in 1980, when they looked around the world and they looked at all the long-lived populations, they ate diets that were very high in carbs. I'm going to show you the numbers. Some were 80, 85% carbohydrate. And that's why they recommended we eat more carbs and less fat. And what they meant was that we should eat carbs like this: brown rice, oatmeal, fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, starchy vegetables, leafy greens, even potatoes. These were the foods they were hoping we would eat. They're very low in calories, very low in calorie density. They're packed with water, fiber, vitamins, and minerals. All the fresh fruits, veggies, starchy vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. But is this what Americans ate since 1980? No, this is what they ate. All these that are packed with calories, packed in calorie density, stripped of the nutrients. All the cakes, cookies, crackers, pretzels, chips, and all the rest. So what you're looking at makes up 90% of the carbohydrate intake in the United States. 90% of the carbs we eat are white flour, white sugar, white rice, white pasta. The average adult American eats 0.9 servings of whole grains a day. That's it, 0.9. So we got heavy on these, and what did we blame? Corn, grapes, right? People are afraid to eat these foods, yet they didn't cause the problem. Now, when we refine a food, 3 things happen, and I put them here because we're going to come back to it in a minute. The first thing that happens is you take out the water, all right? It's one of the ways you dry fruit right? Second is you take out or you reduce the amount of fiber. And the third is you reduce or eliminate nutrients. The more refining and processing you do, the more this happens. So these are going to be important in a few minutes, so realize this is what refining does. Now, here's an example. What I'm showing you is 200 calories of corn. On the left is cornmeal. I know it looks like a sunny side up egg, but especially by now. But it's a cornmeal. On the right is 200 calories of corn. Now, which one do you think is better for you? The one on the right.
Mhm.
Which do you think tastes better? The one on the right.
Yeah.
Which do you think has more fiber, vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and everything else good for you? The one on the right. And this tastes great. How many of you love corn? We all do.
Yep.
Right. How many of you have ever like sat down in front of the TV with a bag of cornmeal and a spoon?
Nope.
Some of you were reluctant, but I thought you were going to raise your hand. Okay, so then if I make this into this in order to get you to eat it, what do I got to do to it? I got to probably add a little oil, maybe a little salt, maybe a little sugar, make it into something. Definitely put some salt and sugar in it so you'll eat it. So for 25 years, Americans have been getting fat on this, right? And then you ask them how they got heavy, and what do they blame? Corn. Wasn't the corn. So that's carbohydrates. You got the difference? Real simple. You don't have to be a biochemist.
All right, any questions about carbohydrates? Which is a good carbohydrate, which is a bad carbohydrate? Any questions about that? Pretty basic, all right, all right.
Yeah.
Whole foods, not
Mm.
processed or refined. All right, let's move on to fat. So there's good fats and bad fats too, right? Just like there's good carbohydrates and bad carbohydrates. So we're still in the reductionism here. We're still talking about macronutrients here. So the worst fats are the trans fats, which they've pretty much been eliminated from the food supply. So you don't see too much, and they can have, I think, upwards of 0.5 grams in a serving and still have a little bit of trans fat, but it can still say 0 because they can, if it's below 1 gram per serving, they can round it down to 0. But
Wow.
essentially they've eliminated trans fats because they're so bad. They, that was like Crisco and old, margarine in the past, and it's the worst type of fat. It's very unstable. It unstabilizes cell membranes and is really high risk for heart attacks, strokes, everything. So it's really, really bad. So that actually has been eliminated from the food supply. There are some natural trans fats in some animal products, but not in whole plant foods. So that's the worst fat, but again, don't have to worry about it too much. Next worst would be saturated fat, which is basically just animal fat. And it's you always hear from nutrition guidelines from the FDA and My Plate and all these things. We get these nutrition guidelines for Americans that come out every 5 years, and they always say reduce saturated fat. But you notice that they'll say eat more fruits and vegetables, but they'll say eat less saturated fat. So isn't that interesting how when they do eat more messaging, they tell you to eat more food, actual foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains. There's consensus on that. But when they say eat less, they don't tell you, because people really know where saturated fat comes from? They'll say eat less saturated fat, because to say where saturated fat comes from, eat less of that, that's a political statement. That means beef, pork, chicken, cheese, other dairy products. That's where all the saturated fat is in those foods. And so they don't say that because that's where they get a lot of their money, lobbyists and things like that. It'd be political suicide to say, for a committee to say, eat less beef, eat less pork, eat less chicken, eat less cheese, because the government subsidizes those foods and tries to push more cheese on us, to push more of these animal products on us, because they're subsidized by our tax dollars, and they're trying to push those foods on us because those are big multi-billion-dollar businesses. So just wanted to kind of throw that out there. There is consensus that we should be eating less saturated fat, but it's just important you guys understand what that means. That's where all the saturated fat is cheese and pork and chicken and ice cream and other processed foods where there's lots of added palm kernel oil and coconut oil and all those types of things, pastries and things like that. That's where all the saturated fat is in the American diet. So so that's the next worst. And then there are some types of good fats. So monounsaturated, polyunsaturated. Those are, it's a lot of the studies for these healthier fats, they're comparing it to the saturated fat products. So, if you compare olive oil, for example, which is a monounsaturated fat, it is a better, if you're going to use oil, that's the better oil to use, but doesn't make it healthy in of itself. It just means, well, olive oil is healthy compared to coconut oil and healthier compared to palm kernel oil and maybe even corn oil and some of these other oils. It is the better choice, but overall, it's still not a healthy food. And we'll talk more about oil in a second, but here's some examples of foods, since oil is just a processed product. There's fat in every food. I mean, even broccoli is like 8% fat. So there's fat in every food, and some more than others. But the highest foods, the foods that are highest in fat are things like nuts and seeds and olives and avocados. And some of the other plant foods have fat, but those are some of the highest ones there. And then fish, I put fish there because there are good fats in fish. So let me ask you this question: is fish a fat, or is fish a food? So is fish reductionist or holistic?
Holistic.
Holistic, you're right, because it's a food, right? And so we don't just we eat food, but when we eat food, we don't just eat the nutrients. We don't just eat the reductionist components. So when we eat fish, we do get some healthy omega-3 fats in there. So that's good, but it also contains saturated fat. It also contains cholesterol and dioxins and environmental pollutants and methyl mercury, and doesn't have fiber. And so there's a lot of, so when you're choosing a food to eat, you want to choose the healthiest packages possible. And so even though fish is healthy compared to bacon, it doesn't necessarily make fish a healthy food overall. So just another example of looking at a food, you kind of taking something like fish, which is a food, and then breaking it down reductionist to holistic. And so you can see how it's a skill that, wow, that's really interesting. Fish, I always thought of fish as being a healthier food, but well, it does have healthy components, the healthy omega-3s, but then it comes with baggage, because you don't get to choose fish. Okay, I want to eat fish with omega-3, but I don't want the saturated fat or the cholesterol or the other environmental pollutants. Well, it doesn't work that way. It comes as a package deal, right? And so I wanted to kind of give you that example. So any questions about fats and what are good fats and what are bad fats?
Unrefined, unfiltered coconut oil, not good.
Correct. So the best way to think about oil, I'm going to move forward on oil here, since you brought it up, is that oil is just a processed food. It's basically the white sugar equivalent. It's the fat equivalent of white sugar. So here's the thing. So when you take sugar beets or sugar cane and you cook it down, refine it into white sugar, that's all you have left. You've taken out all the nutrients, the fiber, everything that was healthy about the beet and the sugar cane, and all you have left is the white crystalline powder. That's what sugar is. And so the same thing with oil. So if you take coconut to make coconut oil, if you take olives, it takes about I think it's 14 olives per tablespoon, like something like, or it's more than that. I forget the exact number now, but it takes lots and lots of olives to make a tablespoon of olive oil. And so it's not a health food, and the reason is because it's highly processed. It's whether it's coconut oil, palm oil, corn oil, olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, extra virgin cold pressed olive oil, avocado oil, or motor oil. It's all 9 calories per gram, 120 calories per tablespoon, and 4,000 calories per pound. So it's the most calorie dense food on the planet. And so you're essentially, if you're trying to lose weight, it's not going to be helpful. But again, like I said earlier, if you're comparing, if you were used to using lots of coconut oil or palm kernel oil, and now you're suddenly using more olive oil, that is an improvement, because there is more of the unsaturated fats in there. So it's the better choice, but the best choice would be not to use oil at all, because it's just a highly processed food. And so just as an example, if you're trying to lose weight, 9 calories per gram for any oil, carbohydrates and protein are only 4 calories per gram. starches like potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans, and tactile grains, they're only 1 calorie per gram. And the reason they're, if you're thinking, well, that's kind of confusing because aren't potatoes, for example, since potatoes are starches, isn't protein 4 calories per gram and carbohydrates 4 calories per gram? How could it only be 1 calorie per gram? Well, it's a whole food, and it also contains water, and it also contains a lot of fiber. And so fiber is really low in calorie. I think it's more like a half a calorie per gram, fiber is. And then think about water. Water is, there's a lot of water weight in a potato, and there's no calories in water. So that's why a starch as a whole food is only about 1 calorie per gram. So if you're dumping olive oil, you're frying a potato in olive oil or any kind of oil, that's 9 calories per gram and 120 calories per tablespoon. So if you're drizzling oil all over something, you're adding a lot of calories and not going to really, it's not going to improve your, contribute towards you feeling full, the satiation. So fat has almost no effect on whether we feel full or not. Only carbohydrates and protein actually satisfy hunger. Fat has almost zero satiety. And so that's why you want to avoid the oil if you can. And probably the most important thing is it actually injures the arteries. So the reason that Dr. Esselstyn says no oil is because on studies on the endothelial function with the brachial artery tourniquet test shows that any kind of oil is actually injures the endothelial cells. And the endothelial cells are the cells that line the artery walls that help the blood vessels dilate and keep the blood flowing smoothly, like Teflon rather than Velcro, keeps things moving smoothly. So you want to protect those little endothelial cells. And anything processed, including oil, or injures those endothelial cells. So does that answer your question about the oil?
Yeah.
So when you're cooking, people can give advice, but you can water saute your vegetables. You can also use vegetable broth or vegetable stock. You can just go on YouTube and type in water saute, and you can see people how you saute your vegetables without using oil. And so that's a way to, when you go out to eat and stuff, you're probably going to get some oil, and so it's not like it's hard to avoid it 100%, especially if you're eating out, but or eating anything processed, even if it's vegan, you're going to be getting oil in a lot of things. But at least at home, you can keep it as safe as possible and learn how to water saute or instead of using oil. Let's give a summary on fat. So get your fat from whole plant foods, just like we talked about with carbohydrates. So there's no such thing as a no-fat diet, because you always hear about people saying, well, where are you going to get your fat if you're not eating any oil and you're not eating any animal products? You're going to be too low on fat. It's like, no, actually, you get plenty of fat from these whole plant foods. Like I said, even broccoli is 8% of the calories are fat. So there's fat in everything, but if you're actually trying to gain weight or maintain weight, that's why we say a lot, well, go ahead and have a few nuts and seeds and avocados and things like that, because and even soy is pretty high in fat. So if you're eating some of those foods I just mentioned, you're going to be getting plenty of fat. Probably 10 to 15% of your calories will be fat, maybe even 20% if you're eating a fair amount of nuts and seeds and avocados. But again, those are the healthier types of fat. And just like this says here, get your fat from the whole plant foods, not from something processed like oil. It's just like with carbohydrates. Get your carbohydrates from whole plant foods, not from refined sugars and flours and chips and cookies and things like that. But remember, this is from Dr. McDougall. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. So whether it's good fat, like from an avocado, or bad fat from cheese, that fat's going to go right to you. They've actually done biopsies of people's fat, and they'll go, oh, do a biopsy of your fat, and it'll be full of oleic acid. And it's like, oh, that means this person eats a lot of olive oil, or this is full of a lot of trans fat back in the day. Oh, you eat a lot of margarine and Crisco. Oh, there's a lot of saturated fat in there. You must eat a lot of cheese, pork, and sausage and bacon, right? So the fat we eat is the fat we wear. It's the metabolic dollar that we store for times of famine, and so our body's really good at storing fat. Some people more than others. So yeah, that's why you want to not be adding a lot of oil to things and eating too many avocados, nuts and seeds and things like that. Or of course, nothing with the foods with the saturated fat like the animal products. You want to keep your arteries clean, and then if you want trying to lose weight, you want to not eat too many of these higher fat foods. Should be getting plenty, and you want to get the right kinds from those unsaturated fats that we showed earlier. Now let's talk about protein. I know we've talked about protein a lot already in the introduction classes and Charlie's class and stuff. And throughout many classes, almost every week, somebody brings this up. And so, we can talk about it more at the end if you still have questions. But this is Dr. McDougall, just a little 3 or 4 minute video on on protein and just pretty much all you need to know about protein right here. It's another macronutrient, the other nutrient with calories, 4 calories per gram.
Hello, I'm Dr. John McDougall, and I want to talk to you a little bit about some basic nutrition. When I mention a plant food-based diet, or a vegetarian diet, or a vegan diet, you know I don't use this terminology to describe our program. Our program is known as a starch-based diet. In other words, the center of the diet is rice, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans, with the addition of fruits and vegetables. That's the McDougall diet, is a starch-based diet. The first thing that your friends and relatives say or think is, oh no, this is a protein deficient diet. I'm not going to be able to get enough protein if I switch to that kind of diet. And you're just going to wither away if you switch to the McDougall diet, a protein deficient diet. The truth is starches are loaded with protein. As a matter of fact, of the calories that are present in common starches, 6% to 28% of the calories are from protein. And how much protein do you need? Well, think about the greatest time of growth in your life. That's when you were a baby. And what's the ideal food for a baby? Human breast milk. And how much protein does human breast milk have in it? 5% of the calories are from protein. So we have sweet potatoes that are 6% protein. We have regular potatoes that are 11% protein. We have oatmeal that's 16% protein, and beans that are 28% protein. And by the way, those proteins are complete in all the amino acids and properly balanced, so you don't have to worry about that either. So a starch-based diet is loaded with protein. I mean, think about it for a minute. How many friends do you have who are protein deficient? No, you don't have any friends that have protein deficiency. How many friends do you have that suffer from problems of excess? Excess fat, excess calories, and really excess protein too. That's right, people have problems from too much protein. That's what's harmful. So when you tell your friends that you're going to go on a diet that's traditional, a diet of rice, corn, potatoes, a starch-based diet, start to argue with them if they counter you about the fact that this is a very sufficient diet in protein. Ask them to prove it to you. Show you the evidence that a starch-based diet is protein deficient. I can show you the evidence that a starch-based diet is very protein sufficient. In fact, visit my website. You'll find that article. It's called When Friends Ask, Where Do You Get Your Protein? I'm Dr. John McDougall. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so when it comes to protein, the question should not be, where do you get your protein? It should be, where do you get your fiber? And the bottom line is, if you eat enough calories, you will get enough protein, period. And so the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance, is 0.8 grams per kilogram is how much protein people need. And that's not your current weight in kilograms. It's actually your ideal weight. So if you take your weight, if you figure out what your weight would be if your body mass index was somewhere between 19 and 24, you could probably do a mid-range there. So say your BMI was 22, how many pounds would you weigh? And then figure that out in kilograms, and then multiply that by 0.8, and that's how many grams of protein you need in a day. And for the average person, it's somewhere between 50 and 70 grams a day. And you have to remember that, if you really I read about the history of where they got the protein guidelines, like I have, it's that 0.8 is very inflated. So if you heard Dr. McDougall say how, you know, human breast milk, which is the time in our life we need the most protein, it's only about 5 to 6% protein, human breast milk is, then, you know, why would we need, you know, the RDA if you follow the RDA at 0.8 grams per kilogram and follow it, you know, say a 2,000 calorie a day diet, and you're eating like 50 to 70 grams of protein a day, you're getting like upwards of 10 to 15% of your calories in protein. It's like, why would we need twice as much protein as adults that we did when we were a growing baby? It's like, yeah, so when you're elderly, we don't absorb quite as much protein, so you might need a little bit more. So I would, you know, would say, well, you probably need at least 6%, you know, 5 to 6% of your calories should be protein, even when you're elderly, because that's how much you needed when you were a growing baby. And so the reason they inflated it a little bit is because they wanted to make sure that there was kind of a safety net for people. So they, you know, how statistics work with the bell curve, they want to make sure they hit people that are falling outside the curve. And so that's why they expanded it. So even 0.8 is inflated, actually more than we actually need. And then, but that's what people always follow is the RDA. And then they say, okay, well, if you're elderly, maybe you need a little bit more than that. If you're a professional athlete, bodybuilder, you might need more like, you know, 1.2 or 1.5 grams per kilogram. And just kind of knowing that when the basement is already inflated, almost doubled what you actually need, then everything sounds like a lot. But even that being said, if you're eating 2,000 calories, you're getting enough calories. Even if you're eating nothing but whole plant foods, you're still getting 10 to 15% of your calories from protein. And if you're eating a lot of soy, a lot of tofu, you're eating a lot of beans, you know, beans and legumes and nuts and seeds, man, you're going to be easily getting that upper end of that normal protein range. And so because there's a ton of studies out there that show that when you're getting, you know, the average American's getting, you know, sometimes upwards of 20% of their calories from protein, they're getting well over 100 grams of protein a day. And it's mostly from animal sources. And we have a lot of studies because of the branch chain amino acids that are in the animal protein. And it's so much harder. The kidneys have to filter out all that protein. And, you know, we get too much. And when it's animal protein, our kidneys seem to actually get injured by this. And so one of the reasons we have such an epidemic of chronic kidney disease in America is because of all the animal protein that everyone's eating. And you actually, if you go to a nephrologist, a kidney specialist, and you're having kidney failure, they're going to tell you to cut down your protein. They're going to say you need to go on a lower protein diet. But really what they should be saying is you should be cutting down animal protein, because we have a lot of studies that show even when you're on a fairly high amount of plant protein, it doesn't seem to be hard on the kidneys. The kidneys seem to have an easy time filtering out the plant protein as opposed to the animal protein, which part of that reason is because most of the amino acids in animal protein are what are called branch chain amino acids, and they're high in sulfur. There's sulfur-based amino acids, and sulfur converts to sulfuric acid, which is a very strong acid. And so the acid load caused by high animal protein is what's causing a lot of the health problems with kidney disease and whatnot. So the bottom line is you don't need to worry about protein. If it was a word nobody in class ever brought up ever again, I'd be happy. I'd have done my job. Because nobody needs to worry about protein. We need to worry about fiber. Where do you get your fiber? If you don't get your fiber, you're going to be, well, where am I going to get my heart disease from, right? And so you got to get the fiber in the whole plant foods. You don't need to worry about protein. Even, I mean, we can still, it's never going to go away because it's such a marketing tool. It's just, you know, in Latin, protein means proteus. Protein in proteus means of prime importance. And so that's where it comes from. And protein cells, that's the problem. And it's kind of, this is an example of how reductionism has really done damage to what's really important about nutrition. And I'm going to show a couple of videos here coming up next that kind of puts this together, the whole idea of reductionist science versus holistic science. But I want to see if you guys have any questions about protein before I show those videos.
Reductionism permeates the language used to describe foods, which almost makes it hard to succeed unless you parse out the animal-based protein meanings.
Right. Yes, it's a great example of how why this talk tonight is so important, because everybody just focuses on the nutrients, the reductionist nutrients, and not the, you always hear about people balancing. I'm working on my macros. I got to get this much % of my calories in protein, fat, and carbohydrate. It's like, well, two foods that are very different can have the exact same macro distribution. They could have the exact same, a bean versus a jelly bean. There's foods where they have the exact same amount of fat, carbs, and protein. Those two aren't the same, but there's lots of foods where that's the case. And Jeff Novick shows some of that in the rest of that video, where two foods can have the exact same amount of fat, protein, and carbohydrates, but have very different effects on the body, because the holistic part of it, the foods are very different, and the foods are what are important, the food packages. All right, well, let's show these two videos here. Real important to kind of tie this together.
Research in human nutrition over the last 40 years has led to numerous discoveries and to a comprehensive understanding of the exact mechanisms behind how food nutrients affect our bodies. However, the epidemics of diet-related chronic diseases, obesity, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, heart disease, stroke, cancers, dramatically increases worldwide year after year. Why hasn't all this intricate knowledge translated into improvements in public health? Maybe it has to do with our entire philosophy of nutrition called reductionism, where everything is broken down to its constituent parts, where food is reduced to a collection of single compounds with supposed single effects. The reductionist approach has traditionally been and continues today as the dominant approach in nutrition research. For example, did you know that mechanistically there's a chemical in ginger root that downregulated 4-ball myristate acetate-induced phosphorylation of ERK1, 2, and J and K MAP kinases? That's actually pretty cool, but not while millions of people continue to die of diet-related diseases. We already know that 3/4 of chronic disease risk, diabetes, heart attacks, stroke, cancer, can be eliminated if everyone who didn't followed 4 simple practices: not smoking, not being obese, half an hour and exercise a day, eating a healthier diet, defined as more fruits and veggies and whole grains and less meat. Think what that could mean in terms of the human cost. Right? We already know enough to save millions of lives. So shouldn't our efforts be spent implementing these changes before another dollar is spent figuring out whether or not some grape skin extract can lower cholesterol in zebrafish, or even Whole Foods for that matter? Why spend taxpayer dollars clogging the arteries of striped minnows by feeding them a high cholesterol diet to see if hawthorn leaves and flowers have the potential to help? Even if they did, and even if it worked in people too, wouldn't it be better to just not clog your arteries in the first place? This dramatic drop in risk, this increase in healthy life years through preventive nutrition need not involve superfoods or herbal extracts or fancy nutritional supplements, just healthier eating. When Hippocrates said something like, "Let food be your medicine and medicine be your food," he didn't mean that foods are drugs, but rather that the best way to remain in good health may be to maintain a healthy diet. Whereas the historical attitude of the field of nutrition may be best summed up by the phrase, "Eat whatever you want after you eat what you should." In other words, eat whatever you want as long as you get your vitamins and minerals. A mindset epitomized by breakfast cereals, providing double-digit vitamins and minerals, but the road to health is not paved with Coke plus vitamins and minerals. This reductionistic attitude is good for the food industry, but not actually good for human health. Because if food is just good for a few nutrients, then you can get away selling vitamin fortified Twinkies. We need to shift from the concept of just getting adequate nutrition to getting optimal nutrition, not just avoiding scurvy, but promoting health and minimizing our risk of developing degenerative diseases. Bringing things down to their molecular components works for drug development, discovering all the vitamins, curing deficiency diseases, but in the field of nutrition, the reductionist approach is beginning to reach its limits. We discovered all the vitamins more than a half century ago. When's the last time you heard of someone coming down with scurvy or pellagra or kwashiorkor, or the classic deficiency syndromes? Whereas, what about the diseases of dietary excess? Heart disease, diabetes, obesity, hypertension. Ever heard of anyone with any of those? Yet we continue to have this deficiency mindset when it comes to nutrition. When someone tries to reduce their consumption of meat, the first question they may get asked is, where are you going to get your protein? Rather than, wait a second, if you start eating like that, where are you going to get your heart disease from? The same deficiency mindset led to the emergence of a multi-billion-dollar supplement industry. What about a daily multivitamin just as insurance against nutrient deficiency? Better insurance would be to just eat healthy food.
More video to play off of that.
The prevalence of chronic diseases like diabetes has skyrocketed, as have the number of articles published about diabetes in medical journals. Why does our wealth of academic knowledge not translate more directly into making things better? Maybe it's our overattachment to the reductionistic mindset that proved so successful with acute deficiency diseases, but may actually represent an obstacle to successfully battle chronic disease, as I've touched on before. Health these days seems to be reduced to a highly commercialized commodity in which we're marketed all sorts of high-cost, high-tech tests and treatments of dubious value with substantial risks attached, which is worrisome because most of the things that make us healthy and keep us healthy are cheap and largely available without professional help or commercial prodding. This isn't to say modern medicine can't work miracles, but what about the big picture? The 80% of death and disability caused by preventable diet-related diseases. But of course, the field of nutrition is commercialized too. It's all about profits and products and extracting nutrients from whole foods so they can be repackaged and marketed. Yes, food is best eaten whole. For example, just eat the broccoli, the blueberries, not some broccoli supplement. But the reason there aren't more studies on whole foods fairly obvious. You can't patent them. Why should a company spend a lot of money, time, and effort to convince you to buy broccoli when any other company can sell it to you? That's why the field of nutrition can be more about marketing profitable products than educating people about the fundamentals of health and wellness. For example, the benefits of whole grains over refined grains is commonly attributed to the fiber. This allows the food industry to whip out fiber-fortified Fruit Loops and make you feel all better. But check out this ingenious study. Burgett and colleagues thought the extraordinarily low rates of killer chronic diseases in sub-Saharan Africa was due to all the whole plant foods they were eating. This turned into the fiber hypothesis, the reductionistic thought that fiber must be the magic bullet active ingredient. Well, hey, let's put it to the test. Refined grains have some fiber left in them. So what if you compared two groups of older women, both getting around 6 grams of grain fiber a day, but one group mostly from whole grains and the other mostly from refined grains? Who do you think lived longer? If it was just the fiber, there shouldn't be much difference because they ate about the same amount. But the whole grain group lived longer, significantly lower mortality rate. So this implies that it may be all the other wonderful things in whole plant foods linked to fiber that may confer important health benefits above and beyond the fiber itself. That's why fiber supplements wouldn't be expected to offer the same benefit. Food, not nutrients, is the fundamental unit in nutrition. Dr. David Katz has pointed out our culture doesn't want to hear that the active ingredient in broccoli is broccoli.
Yikes.
All right.
Oh,
Any questions, comments before I move on to some popular diets? Guys, I probably beat that dead horse out of the reductionist versus holistic. But that's so important, so very important.
yeah. Wow. Well, I guess I have to take a rototiller to some of the things that I thought I knew.
What was the most surprising thing you learned tonight so far?
Well, starches, I think, being foods containing huge numbers of nutrients and not being intrinsically evil. People talk about carbo loading before they do athletics and stuff like that. That's been a popular plus for carbs, but it's usually very specific ones. But I've been sliding toward reductionism ever so incrementally for a long time. And man, it's night and day when you see the evidence and you just think it's a palm slap to the forehead. How could I have just not seen that happening? Well, you fool, it's because you like sweet things and cookies and crap. Yeesh, busted.
Those highly palatable foods are like drugs to us. They market them to us, and it's hard to resist for sure.
It's amazing to watch the evolution of cereals and cereal types, meaning boxed cereals specifically, and cookies. Oh, somebody has peanut butter in theirs. We have peanut butter in our Oreos. Oh, great. An Oreo with peanut butter. That's a plus. Not. It's just, oh, man, it's appalling. And I've been in the field for a long time. I should have known better. That's embarrassing. I'll have to have some Whole Foods as punishment.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I'll jump into some other popular diets, and if we anytime we can cut it short, because I can always continue this a little bit next week, because it'll blend right in with Charlie's Diet Wars, and we can take as much time as we want. But definitely want to talk about low carb diets because they're so popular out there, have been for a long time, and I even followed a Atkins diet for about 3 years, about 16, 17 years ago now, 18 years, something like that, a long time ago. But it came to my senses when I saw the science later on. The science early on looked like it looked okay. It was, some weight loss and reduction of cholesterol and blood sugars and things that looked good. But it's really only further studies showed that it was only because of the weight loss that you get those benefits, and that comes with a lot of risk. So I'll be showing a video about that here in a second. But so ketogenic diets, low carb diets, by definition, a ketogenic diet is a low carb diet because you have to have a high enough amount of fat and protein and a low enough amount of carbohydrates to use fatty acids for energy to put you into ketosis. So that's what ketogenic means, is you are burning fat for energy, and the byproducts, or the exhaust, so to speak, of fat metabolism is ketones, and then you go into ketosis. But that's, ketosis is it's difficult to maintain, and most people that follow low carb or ketogenic diets aren't necessarily in ketosis because it's so difficult to stay in, because it's a state of illness. It's a state we have, if we're fasting and we're back in the hunter-gatherer days and we can't eat for a certain amount of time because we're trying to find food. Our brain has to have sugar for energy. Our brain can't use fat for fuel. And so we have to convert the fat to ketones, and then the ketones can fuel the brain. So that's what ketosis is. And some of these diets are not necessarily keto diets, but they're just still by definition low carb diets. Even if you're not in ketosis, it can still be considered low carb if you're eating a high enough amount of fat, protein, and a low enough amount of carbohydrates. So like Atkins, Eco Atkins, which Eco Atkins is basically a plant-based ketogenic type of a diet. So they don't eat any animal products, but it's very restrictive. You're eating a lot of avocados, oils, nuts and seeds, really, really high fat plant foods to have a high enough amount of fat and protein to be in ketosis and a low enough amount of carbohydrate. Some of the other low carb diets you might remember: the Zone, South Beach, carnivore diet, which is out there as well, paleo in some cases. Where it's important to mention on paleo is that if you actually followed the paleo diet as it was originally created by Boyd Eaton. Boyd Eaton was the creator of the paleo diet. And if you actually followed it to a T the way he wrote it, it's actually mostly a plant-based diet, actually, because it's, you're eating some wild game, but you're not eating dairy, and you're eating tons of fruit, of vegetables. The fruit that you eat is mostly berries, a little bit higher in fiber, but lots and lots of vegetables and then some wild game. That's the original development of the paleo diet, and Boyd Eaton has, since seeing some of the more recent studies, he's retracted and said, well, if you're going to do paleo, you should probably keep the meat really low and really be eating more vegetables, maybe even some starchy vegetables, because some of the studies on the paleo poop, which Charlie might show at one of the videos down the road, they actually did studies on the coprolites, which are the paleo people's stools. And when they analyzed the stools, it was determined that they're eating upwards of 100 grams of fiber a day. So the only way you're going to get 100 grams of fiber a day is eating a mostly plant-based diet.
Yeah.
But I mention it here under the low carb diets because a lot of people that follow paleo, the modern paleo diet, they're kind of treating it as a low carb diet. They're eating tons of animal products, still eating a fair amount of vegetables, and then some fruit, but so it's still, a healthier diet than the standard American diet, but if you were following it the way it was originally, it was mostly a plant-based diet anyway. But anyway, there's some of the low carb diets, but I want to show you this video because they've had studies done on longer term studies that they didn't have back when I was following an Atkins diet, that they have that show what its effects are on our heart. So I want to show this video real quick.
People going on low carb diets may not see a rise in their cholesterol levels. How is that possible? Because weight loss by any means can drop our cholesterol. We could go on an all Twinkie diet and lower our cholesterol if we were unable to eat the dozen daily Twinkies necessary to maintain our weight. That's why a good cocaine habit can lower cholesterol. Chemotherapy can drop cholesterol like a rock. Tuberculosis can work wonders on one's waistline. Anything that drops our weight can drop our cholesterol, but the goal isn't to fit into a skinnier casket. The reason we care about cardiovascular risk factors like cholesterol is because we care about cardiovascular risk, the health of our arteries. Well, now we have studies that have measured the impact of low carb diets on arteries directly. And a review of all the best studies done to date found that low carb diets impair arterial function, as evidenced by a decrease in flow mediated dilation, meaning low carb diets effectively cripple people's arteries. And since the meta-analysis was published, another study found the same thing: dietary pattern characterized by high protein and fat with low carbohydrate associated with poorer peripheral small artery function, again, measuring blood flow into people's limbs. Peripheral circulation is great, but what about circulation in the coronary arteries that feed our heart? There's only been one study ever done measuring actual blood flow to the heart muscles of people eating low-carb diets, and this is it. Dr. Richard Fleming, an accomplished nuclear cardiologist, enrolled 26 people into a comprehensive study of the effects of diet on cardiac function using the latest in nuclear imaging technology, so-called SPECT scans, enabling him to actually directly measure the blood flow within the coronary arteries. He then put them all on a healthy vegetarian diet, and a year later, the scans were repeated. By that time, however, 10 of the patients had jumped ship onto the low-carb bandwagon. At first, I bet he was upset, but surely soon realized he had an unparalleled research opportunity dropped into his lap. Here he had extensive imaging on 10 people following a low-carb diet and 16 following a healthy high-carb diet. What would their hearts look like at the end of the year? We can talk about risk factors all we want, but compared to the veg group, did the coronary heart disease of the patients following the Atkins-like diets improve, worsen, or stay the same? Those sticking to the vegetarian diet showed a reversal of their heart disease as expected. Their partially clogged arteries literally got cleaned out. They had 20% less atherosclerotic plaque in their arteries at the end of the year than at the beginning. What happened to those who abandoned the treatment diet and switched over to the low-carb diet? Their condition significantly worsened. 40 to 50% more artery clogging at the end of the year. Thanks to the kind generosity of Dr. Fleming, we can actually see the changes in blood flow for ourselves. Here are some representative heart scans. The yellow and particularly red represent blood flow through the coronary arteries to the heart muscle. This patient went on a plant-based diet and coronary arteries opened right up, increasing blood flow. This person, however, started out with good flow, but after a year on a low-carb diet, significantly clogged down their arterial blood flow. This is the best science to date, demonstrating the threat of low-carb diets, not just measuring risk factors, but actual blood flow in people's hearts on different diets. Of course, the reason we care about cardiac blood flow is we don't want to die, and a meta-analysis was recently published that finally went ahead and measured the ultimate endpoint, death. And low-carb diets were associated with significantly higher risk of all-cause mortality, meaning low-carbers living a significantly shorter lifespan.
What I wanted to add to that is there was another study on low carb diets that just came out last month. And it was the study was presented at the American College of Cardiology conference just this last month. The data came from the United Kingdom Biobank is the data collection. And they had 1,220 controls. And then they had 305 patients that were following a low carb, high fat diet, which was defined as getting equal to or less than 25% of calories from carbohydrates and greater than or equal to 45% of calories from fat. So those are kind of the, as we talked about earlier, you have to have a low enough amount of carbs, a high enough amount of protein and fat to be considered low carb. And at the end of the study, it was I think it was a year. So I didn't write down the time frame, but so the people on the 1,220 controls and 305 on the low carb diet, they had an increase in their LDL cholesterol. They had a 2 times greater risk of having a heart stent put in, a heart attack, a stroke, and peripheral artery disease. So they doubled their risk of having a heart attack, a stent, a stroke, and peripheral arterial disease. And that was the most recent study that was done on that. So I wanted to share that. So any questions about low carb diets, keto diets? Nothing comes to mind. I know there's so many people on those diets, and it's important to have those questions answered.
I'm going to have to review this whole presentation before I can ask questions next week, I think.
Sure. Well, it will be recorded, so you can watch it. We'll have it posted on the website by Thursday. I also have a video about the plant paradox. It's not as popular. It hasn't been as popular these days. I can show it if you want, but so there's more time for questions. I can go past it if you want, but the basics of it is it's avoiding lectins, which are in beans. And the reason it says doesn't pass the sniff test is because we know that beans are one of the healthiest foods that people can eat. So the blue zones, which are the healthiest, longest lived populations on the planet, eat the one food they had the most in common in all 5 blue zones was eating a lot of beans and legumes. And all the blue zones eat lots of whole grains, beans and legumes, and they have the longest lives and the healthiest lives. And so they're loaded with these lectins. And so this video just shows, all the products that Dr. Gundry has on his website to block lectins and all this stuff. But when it comes to lectins, if you're eating raw kidney beans, for example, then those lectins would be harmful. Those would be inflammatory and make you sick.
Yeah.
But because we cook beans, it destroys the lectins, and so you don't get sick from them. So it's just one of those things. I mean, if I can show this video if you want, but I can move on to the next thing if you kind of get the gist of that there. sometimes diet books can be misleading. All right. So some other diets out there, Weight Watchers, appetite control, like with appetite suppressants, like places like Monarch, a lot of times will prescribe, different appetite suppressants. And then all the other philosophies, portion control, calorie counting, products like with Jenny Craig, Slim Fast, Nutrisystem, and Eat Less, Exercise More messaging. These are just some of the other, this kind of spins off from the weight management classes we had back in January. And so, just kind of some of the other philosophies out there. And then when it comes to weight loss, these are the three basic philosophies I just wanted to show you. So with a whole food plant-based diet, it's all about calorie density. So dilution is the solution. So that's one way to lose weight, which is, in our opinion, the healthiest way, because you're promoting, you're reversing heart disease, diabetes, helping prevent and treat cancer and autoimmune diseases and all these other chronic diseases at the same time that you're hopefully you should be losing weight if you're following the tenets of a whole food plant-based diet, because it is, these foods are high in nutrient density, low in calorie density. And if you have more questions about calorie density, you can go back to the second class we had on weight management, where I discussed calorie density in detail. And then we have the ketogenic diets, which we talked about, high fat, high protein, low carb. So going into ketosis, or and a lot of times when people do lose weight on low carb diets, as I mentioned, most people that are on low carb diets don't maintain ketosis. So the reason that they do tend to lose weight is because, well, they're cutting out a lot of processed foods, which is good. So they're usually avoiding the refined carbohydrates. So that's cutting out a lot of calories. And then they're eating lots of vegetables, which are low in calorie density. So that's a benefit there as well. And so that's one of the reasons you lose weight. Usually early on, especially if you're doing it really strictly and you are in ketosis early on, which many people are early in the diet, most of the weight you lose in the first week or two is water weight, because you're getting rid of all your stored glycogen, and for every molecule of glycogen that's released, 2 molecules of water are released. And so that's why you pee like crazy, you lose a lot of water weight. And then there's actually been studies on medical ward studies that show, yeah, you're losing a little bit of fat, but you're actually losing a lot of muscle mass too. So it causes a lot of muscle wasting, protein wasting. So that's another reason it's not so great. But anyway, that's the philosophy of ketogenic diets. And then the third philosophy of diets and weight loss is portion control. So and appetite suppression. So I write good luck there, because if you're having to fight your hunger drive, it's never going to be sustainable. So those are the three basic philosophies, and that's all I had for you guys. So we have 10 minutes or so for any other questions you have about anything. I'll stop sharing here. Other questions, thoughts about anything we discussed tonight?
Scott,
Yeah.
this is Beth.
Hi.
Hi. I'm wondering, how do I get my protein if I don't eat my meats?
Yeah. So did you watch the video with Dr.
I didn't get the whole video, no.
Okay.
I came in around late.
Okay. Yeah. So all whole plant foods contain protein. So anything from, we only actually need about 6% of our calories from protein, because that's how much protein is in human breast milk. So really that's all we actually need. But if you follow a 100% whole food plant-based diet, you're probably going to be getting 10 to 15% of your calories from protein. And so some examples are, potatoes are about anywhere from 6 to 11% protein. Vegetables are upwards of 15 to 20% protein. Beans and legumes are like 20%.
I do eat beans.
Yeah, so no matter what you eat, you're going to be getting plenty of protein. So you just eat a wide variety of whole plant foods, and you're going to get all the protein that you need. So the only thing you need to remember, anyone in this class needs to remember about protein, is as long as you get enough calories, you're going to get enough protein no matter what.
Okay. Number 2. Oh, my mind went blank. I'm sorry, Scott.
Okay. Speak up if you remember again.
So Beth, I just wanted to chime in a little bit. We grow up in our culture under a lot of myths. And one of the myths is that we need to eat animals for protein. So try to take that out of your brain. Sort of like we all have been brainwashed that we need animals for protein. But when we look at the science, we find that's not the truth. The truth is you get enough protein as long as you're eating enough calories.
Okay, say I'm around 255. How many calories should I be eating approximately daily?
You don't really need to worry about how many there's calorie needs are really tricky because it's even a seasoned dietitian cannot accurately estimate calories that people are eating. And so really it's just what food packages you're choosing to eat, which we're hoping is mostly whole plant foods here. And then just eating till you're comfortably full with every meal. You should never have to feel hungry. So you should be eating lots of beans and whole grains and potatoes and sweet potatoes and a whole rainbow of fruits and vegetables and other intact whole grains. And as long as you're eating till you're comfortably full, you'll get, your body knows how much your hunger drive works just fine, and your hunger drive will always protect your lean body mass. And
Right. So best thing to do is avoid as much processed foods, and then go with the whole grains and
Whole
vegetables and fruit.
grains and beans and fruit and vegetables. And do you have a smartphone at all?
I have an Android. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Yes.
So you could download the app, Gregor's Daily Dozen, the Daily Dozen app, and it'll show you on that app 3 servings of beans, serving is a half a cup, 3 servings of whole grain, 4 servings of fruit, 5 servings of vegetables, and a few other items that are plants. You'll get plenty of food, you'll get plenty of protein. Most people can't eat all of that.
Okay.
So, when you come back, you may have some questions after looking over that app, and come back next week and share again. And if you need some additional help, we have a medical student, Lisa Chick, who'd be happy to talk with you and kind of guide you along. You know, when you try to do this on your own, for some people, it's sort of like trying to learn how to play the piano or learn to play tennis. It's helpful to have a coach. And that's what these classes are for, but some people need a little bit more. And the help is free. And Lisa Chick, I think, is here. She'll probably put her information in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
Scott, it's good to see you again, and I'm hoping this time I'll stick to it and work on it, because I really want to live the rest of my life in good health.
great, we're here for you. We'll always be here for you. So that's great.
Thank you, Scott.
Marcia.
Oh,
Yes.
Answering her about protein, I tell people, you know, I go, plants have protein. They go, not all plants do. And so that's their answer is to plant proteins. Not all of them do.
Okay.
But I think they all do. That's so.
Right.
Thank you.
there was
There's a
good
question on
chat.
how do you know who to trust on social media? You want to take that?
Sure, that's why we talk about this in the class a lot, is you got to know who to trust. And we trust, nutritionfacts.org, because that's the nutrition science. They review 100,000 published nutrition papers and studies every year, a whole staff of people, and then all the other people we follow and talk about in the classes. So that's so very important, because you gotta know who to trust. You gotta trust in nutritional science. And this isn't the Charlie and Scott diet. This is nutritional science. And I've talked about this before, that when I think that was one of the big things I learned when I studied this 10 years ago, is that I thought there was a lot of controversy about what's the healthiest diet. There's a lot of debate about it, and I thought the same thing. But then when I actually studied academic nutrition, so when you take out all the hype and you just study the academics of nutrition and nutritional science, it's like, oh, worldwide, there's actually is a consensus. Yeah, there's probably, 5 to 10% of the details are probably a little bit, some debate and a little bit of, how do you interpret the science and stuff. But I would say 90 to 95% of the consensus worldwide is to eat a plant predominant whole food plant-based diet. And then in Charlie's lecture, the second week of January, he does a good job kind of summarizing all the different organizations that support this way of eating. And so we're not just talking off our own opinions and beliefs. We're talking about organizations, all the American College of Cardiology, Charlie could probably rattle a whole bunch of them off, but and I follow that. I'm also board certified with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, which is all about evidence-based nutrition. And it's we're reflecting the summation of the science, what is believed to be the healthiest way of eating right now with the science and the information we have right now. So stick with us, stick with nutritionfacts.org, and we won't be led astray.
Okay.
That's why this class was so important for that, because kind of knowing you get new information coming in all the time. So now you'll be able to go, well, that's a bit reductionist. So yeah, that's interesting. And maybe give some, like, here's another example. Charlie and I talk about this all the time. So when you eat meat and dairy products, you foster bacteria in your colon that make TMAO, trimethylamine antioxide. And so the choline that's in poultry and eggs and dairy, and then the carnitine, which is in meat, other meats, red meats, that gets converted by bacteria in the colon into this trimethylamine, and then the trimethylamine actually pushes the oxidized bad cholesterol into your artery walls and leads to heart failure and heart disease and cancer, and there's lots of bad stuff going on with this TMAO. And so that's an example of reductionist, right? So to us, that's really interesting, because now we have a mechanism as to why eating these meat and dairy and eggs and all that, that's one of the many reasons why it's not associated with good health. So like, we have studies that show associations, but people always say with nutrition studies, well, association doesn't equal causation. So you got to have cause and effect, right? And it's hard to do randomized trials on food, because nutrition is about food, right? But then so we get that information, but so we keep looking for more reductionist information to kind of show, okay, why does this association about eating meat and dairy, why does that lead to more heart disease? Well, there's lots of reasons. And then TMAO is just one of those reductionist reasons. Oh, we have a mechanism now. That's one of the things. So you see how it works together. We still want to pay attention to the reductionist information, but we got to keep it in context. We got to go, oh, well, that's one of the reasons why there's more heart disease when you eat more animal products. So just a good example of how you take information and you interpret it, and then you keep it in context, so you don't get lost down those rabbit holes. And
It's not on here. What, honey? What?
Okay, so are there one last question, perhaps? And if not, we will be back next week. Scott, that was great. Thank you a bunch.
looking forward to next week.
And thank you all for your questions. It was a very interesting session.
Oh,
Yes,
perfect.
it was. Charlie.
Thank you.
Yes,
Did you figure out what was wrong with your mic?
I haven't. I'm going to spend some time with tech people and figure it out, though. I'll get there. Okay, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.